When I spoke to you last November, I was an academic in transition, and I was reflecting at that point about on my own personal experience of climate breakdown and how that was being felt within the educational sector. I am a psychologist. At the point, I was trying to make sense of seemingly irrational behaviour on the part of a proportion of humankind to knowingly wreak havoc on all life, and to do so apparently unaware of the effects of our own consumer-driven lifestyles on the biosphere. And I'd like to consider myself a rational academic. To me, it made little sense. And I suppose at the time I felt that simply talking about it a lot would make people see sense. And that was a fairly naive perspective, but an academic perspective, and perhaps one shared by my fellow academics. And I've come to realise that, of course, it's not as simple as that at all. I would go into the office with journal papers, and I took in with me the Hothouse Planet paper, and I took Jem's paper with me as well. And at our executive meetings, I said, guys, forget growing student numbers. These are the things that we should be looking at. We should be looking at the potential collapse of civilization, and we should be looking at the trajectory of our planet if we continue. And the people I worked with at the time, I was a pro vice chancellor. I worked with a very senior team, and we would look at these papers, and it wasn't, yes, that's very interesting. It's deeply worrying. It's deeply concerning. It's scary. It's almost too scary. And I'd say, well, what shall we do about it? And we can't just plant a few trees, as Dougal had said. It's far more complicated than that. And I was very dissatisfied with the response of higher education in particular, not necessarily just by university. It didn't seem to have an adequate or proportionate response, and didn't seem willing or able to grapple with the problems. So I resigned from my job at the end of last year, and I started to work more closely with Scientists Warning and with Extinction Rebellion. And I did that because I felt that it was important to do something, as I'm sure we all do. And the question for me was, what can I do? So I reached out to my network of people and said, well, isn't it time for some grassroots activism? And someone told me that the person I needed to speak to was Roger Hallam, who is the visionary and the brains, if you like, behind Extinction Rebellion.
The general public is not some sort of innocent bystander, The general public has obligations, and it's justified.
His insights and his thinking about how to bring about social change that have informed the activities of that movement. As part of my new activist role, I can use that almost as an excuse to talk to people, and surprisingly, people talk to me too. And I spoke with a climate scientist recently about what's likely to happen as we move into an era where 2 degrees of warming is tacitly accepted as likely, and where many accept that restricting warming to 1.5 degrees isn't going to happen, and certainly that climate scientist acknowledged that to be the case. And he said, well, we'll lose the coral reefs. And he just said it as a kind of, in an accepted sort of way, as if it had been assumed that that's going to happen. And there was no emotion behind that, no sense of loss, no sense of, we'll lose the coral reefs and we'll lose other things too. I was told that the UK could cope with up to 4 degrees of warming. And I thought, crikey, what does that actually mean? And it was almost as if there was as if I was invited to be part of a conspirational conversation whereby, the UK is going to be okay, and it might not be okay over there, but let's not worry about that. Which I was distinctly uncomfortable with that, and I don't know whether that reflects some of the conversations you have, but it seems to me as if, to me, it's not okay for us to feel that just because we happen to live in the global privileged north, that we shouldn't worry about the global south. Activism as a response to the crisis has been, for me personally, very rewarding, and I think it's been empowering for people to regain something of their sense of agency and to see, we can try to make the impossible happen. what next in terms of where do we go? So post Extinction Rebellion, a lot of my efforts are focused on the creation of something I'll say a little bit about. It's a do tank where we create interventions to address adaptation and mitigation. So here is a slide illustrating Transition Lab. And this is something I'm seeking to establish with a colleague. I've already got some scientists on board with this as founding members of the steering committee. Its core mission is to place willing scientists, engineers and highly skilled people and volunteers directly with projects seeking to mitigate climate change and ecosystem collapse in addition to adaptation. It will function as a kind of fellowship programme whereby universities will be asked to release their staff to go on sabbatical or periods of study leave and then to work in sort of workshop mode, either in virtual or real space, on a number of problems. We'd like to see tens of thousands of highly trained experts taking leave, going on sabbatical and taking up these fellowships to address the urgent crisis. We need to completely transform education. For me, I think there's a question about where in the sequence that actually comes, because it seems to me that the emergency we face is front of mind and that education potentially comes next, but maybe that's a point to debate. But certainly we need to transform education and really think about what's, at the moment, the current purpose of education at the moment is very much geared towards the economy, and education is very much part of that model of monetization. You know, it's a commodity, which I think is disappointing, but it's part of the reason why I'd left. Not everyone will experience the ecophony that I've talked about briefly, and certainly changing beliefs and mindsets do not lead to lasting behavioural changes. So then the question is, well, what can? And so my concluding point here is that language is in fact everything that we have. You know, language reflects our thoughts, and I think much more consideration is needed to be given to the importance of the language we use and how that frames our thinking. Thank you.
Thank you.